All right, we're back.
We're back.
We're
Wow,
back.
again.
We're back.
We managed to make exactly the same setup as during the introduction of our last video.
We're professional at this now.
It's magic.
Timothy, this is episode 7, Unfamiliar Randomness.
Yes.
I'm very excited for this episode.
Unfamiliar randomness.
There we go. I'm particularly excited for this episode. As we mentioned in our previous episode, we took a little bit of a break over the beginning of summer here in Netherlands, and in that time it's also allowed for some reflection, some introspection. I know you had some crazy thoughts on your holidays and have learned about some interesting things.
Sure.
But I want to kick this episode off because I want to go back over my story and why I became so interested in many of the topics that we discuss on this episode.
Yes.
Psychology, human psychology. I was never particularly interested in psychology for most of my life. And back in 2023, it must have been somewhere around there, I started becoming more interested in psychology. An event happened in my life that made me realize how complex we are as people. We discussed in previous episodes, especially when we were talking about the shadow work, how many of the things that we see in human beings, but specifically in ourselves, we see first through others.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so the same happened with me. Of course, once you're able to see it in others and you realize that as people we have a lot more in common than we do different, you start looking within, you start trying to understand yourself.
Wait a second. I do this as well.
Exactly. When you point your finger at someone, there's 4 fingers pointing back at you.
Yeah.
I will say that back in university, I first found Jordan Peterson. I think it was in 2019. And that's probably where the first, what do you call the beginning of a fire? The kindlings of a fire, I think.
Yeah. The spark.
The spark started. But it was really, in 2023 or so when I engaged in this. And at that time, there was a particular video, which I've mentioned before on this podcast, that really opened my eyes to this journey that I've now gone on. And it is the video by Dr. Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab podcast with Dr. Paul Conti, who is a professor and the head of psychology at Harvard. And it really opened my eyes because it showed me what psychology looks like from a simpler perspective. It broke it down for me.
Right.
And the analogy that it used was the comparison between mental health and physical health. So before we get into it, Dr. Andrew Huberman did 4 episodes with Dr. Paul Conti. The first one is by far the most popular. The title of it is How to Assess Your Mental Health.
Let's link that as well in the description.
Of course. And it's his most popular of the 4. And I think one of his most popular videos ever. It's got about 15 million views. It's 3.5 hours long. It's a bad boy. Like, it is a video, right? But for me at the time, I watched it, I think, over the space of a week or 2 in chunks, because it's a lot to take in at once. And my eyes were opened. And I couldn't go back. I became fascinated by psychology, and we spent many hours discussing psychology over the years, and I became interested and watched other videos, became a huge fan of Diary of the CEO podcast. Paul Conti was also on there, although I do still find his videos, he's been on a bunch of podcasts, but his video with Dr. Andrew Huberman, that original first episode, the best. And like with anything, because we're human, if you don't read a book in a very long time or watch a movie or watch a podcast, some of these ideas slip into the back of the subconscious.
Yeah.
And recently another event happened in my life which made me start thinking more about the complexity of humans and also about myself. And I remembered that video, and something called me within to go back and revisit that video. And wow, I am so glad that I did. It really opened my eyes again.
So I'm extremely curious. So thank you, Michael, for the introduction of the topic for today. I have a bunch of questions, and I think what makes a lot of sense, I hope the viewers have the same questions, that I will just kind of be interviewing you about this, about your journey, experiencing the life of someone who doesn't care about psychology to the person that you are now.
Yeah.
Quite interested in it, I would say. So let's just take like a small step back. You said that you started reading Jordan Peterson in 2019.
Not reading, but watching some of his stuff.
Watching, right? Was that the first time you were encountering anything related to psychology? And what did you find interesting in him at that time? What made you watch it?
It was the way that he rationalizes sort of irrational concepts, because I mean the complexities of the human mind can be quite irrational, but there are patterns, familiar patterns or unfamiliar randomness, and you can look at these patterns and draw inferences and conclusions at least at a meta level from them. It was particularly Jordan Peterson's series about the psychological significance of the biblical series.
Oh, I love those as well. That was my gateway drug into
drug. And it was particularly in some of the beginning episodes, he talks about the snake that tempted Eve to eat the apple, and how for so long, if you look at the evolutionary perspective of mankind's development, the snake was one of the only predators when we were up in trees. And
it was a big
the apple was something that we ate. So he started linking it in this sort of way. And so I became very interested in the way that I would say more how he thought than the actual content is what I was initially drawn to.
I think for me, it was the same case that he opened up the door to how to properly interpret symbolism, basically.
Yes.
So I also found that very interesting. But then you said that you found that interesting, but that was not the moment for you that you opened the door, right? That was then years later, Paul Conti and Andrew Huberman. Was there anything in between, any kind of things that you read or watched that kind of moved you towards that direction, or it was like a whole lot of nothing and then...
Yeah, the odd self-development podcast. And, I'm like interested in many things, but I didn't have that fire at all.
So then, please explain to me and to the rest of the viewers, hi Mom, what's so special about that episode of Paul Conti?
And I think, we've discussed it a bit briefly, and I think you've actually listened to it. I remember raving about it to you a year ago, and you listened to it in the car on the way back to Amsterdam.
I haven't watched all four of them, by the way.
No.
I listened to them.
I think I think eventually get through all four of them, but over a long period of time. Definitely the first one was the one that's resonated the most with me, and the one that I rewatched recently in the past few weeks. The thing that I really liked is the analogies that Andrew Huberman and Paul Conti draw to physical health. So when we look at the idea of health, you see it as something that one can measure, especially one's physical health. So you want to know how healthy is someone? Well, you can measure their blood pressure, measure their resting heart rates. You can put them under some sort of strain, put them on a treadmill, inclined treadmill for 10 minutes and see how their body responds. You can also look at them physically. You can see if someone's morbidly obese, measure their BMI. So we have metrics to measure physical health.
Yeah, more or less objectively.
We also have protocols to improve one's physical health if one wants to. And so the question is, well, how does one measure or get an idea of how mentally healthy you are? And once you have an idea, what are the protocols that one can use to improve one's mental health?
Yeah.
And that absolutely fascinated me, because if you can do it in the physical realm, you should be able to do it in the mental realm. But I feel like if you ask the average person on the streets, how do you measure physical health and how do you improve it? 99% of people will know 90% what to do. You measure someone's weight, blood pressure, resting heart rate, and what do? You tell them to go for a run twice a week, and their physical health's going to improve, sort of thing. Like, people know what to do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to mental health, I feel like there's this massive void, this huge void. At least for me, it was something so unknown, and that's one of the reasons why I became so fascinated by this particular episode.
And I could also tell that it was unknown to you. It was clear that you were very mentally unwell at it.
Well, if we look at the reason that I became so interested in it was, I think a lot of the time I become more interested in understanding myself and understanding others when one feels a lot of emotion. And so at that time I was going through or just gone through a breakup. And so in those times you experience a lot of emotion as a person, and you're trying to figure out a lot of things. And finding this episode at that time is what allowed me to really open up that box of curiosity within my mind and really dive deep.
I had a question that popped up based on this. So I like the analogy as well, and I think it's a unique one, and it's a very appealing one, that you can compare mental health to physical health. I think if you would be a critic, I don't want to linger too much on it, but you could say that people, for instance, there's also a range of healthy blood pressures. Let's say, right?
For sure.
In a similar way, there might also be a range of mental like states.
Yes.
So it's also not necessarily always like like
exact science.
No, it's not an exact science, right? No. But in both cases, it's
yes.
not, right?
And I mean, like, you know, you can take a 130-kilogram rugby player who is carrying quite a bit of fat, but a really big, chunky boy, and the average person would look at him and think, okay, maybe he's not that healthy, but he's actually really healthy because he exercises every single day and eats lots of. So you know,
he's an athlete.
Yeah. So once again, we're looking at patterns here. We're looking at big picture. We're looking at trends, and there's always exceptions.
But it's a very, very useful analogy, I think.
For sure.
And then, so since I'm coming more from like Jungian thinking, which is going into maybe very complex things, also like very much focused on symbolism, but goes into like the archetypes that have even like different personalities and stories and yada yada. But like, what is then actually what Paul Conti would say? Like, what is the thing that enticed you so much?
Yeah. So firstly, one of the things that really enticed me was he talks about the idea that as you get more mentally healthy, just like when one gets more physically healthy, the protocol to improve one's health becomes obviously clearer, but things become simpler. Same with physical health. If you're in amazing physical shape, it's quite simple to know what you need to do next. Like if you're a marathon runner and you're now going to run an ultra marathon, you just increase the duration of your runs and you make sure you stretch more, and like you know, it's quite simple.
It's pretty straightforward.
If you're extremely unhealthy, if you're obese and you're struggling to walk and maybe your blood pressure is really bad, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more complex. You can't just say, well, jump in a swimming pool and do 10 laps because maybe someone will drown. So then you really need to look at diet, exercise. Which one do you approach first? What is actually what is someone capable of doing, and all these sorts of things. So I really like the idea of as one becomes healthier both physically and mentally, things become simpler. And it's also a bit more reassuring for me, because one can also get a bit lost in this whole psychology because there's just so much complexity. And for me, it's a bit reassuring to know that, okay, like if you move in the right direction, things will become simpler.
That is a nice way to look at it. I was thinking myself that so what you said is like, if you're moving into the right direction, things will become simpler. The flip side is, of course, as well, that if you're at the bottom, shit's very complex to figure out.
Yeah.
So what would be the encouraging thought for people there?
Well, it's an exponential curve, just like with physical health. And so this was something that I was talking to one of our friends, John Paul, about at the festival we were at this weekend, that I think one of the most important things for people to take control of their lives or change or improve their mental or physical health or whatever it may be is this idea of hope, right? Because at the beginning it's slow, it's an exponential curve, but if you stick to it, then you see huge gains. But you've got to have that hope. So really, like for me, knowledge has truly been power. So specifically the knowledge about neurochemistry, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and really then understanding when I would feel a certain way or want to do something that maybe doesn't align with who I know I truly am, then know that, okay, well, I'm doing this because there is a better future that lies ahead of this decision. There is hope, right? And I think a lot of people, especially if you struggle with mental or physical health or, any type of health, life can seem quite hopeless. Especially with people who suffer from depression and anxiety. I think it can be astronomically difficult to find that hope, but there is a better future that lies ahead. And I think that also ties a lot in with religions and these things where it's that act of belief or faith.
For sure. I mean, there's also this, and I think Jordan Peterson pointed that out as well. There's this thing in the Bible that those who have everything will get everything.
Yeah.
Those who have nothing, everything will be taken.
I think it's for those who have everything, all will be given. For those who have nothing,
everything will be taken.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of the thing, like you said, like this chaotic curve where, as it goes worse, it's gonna get way harder to get out of it. But once you start moving out of it, it becomes easier.
You can see it as a bad thing, but you can also see it as a good thing, because if you're going down the slippery slope, we talk, I don't know if we did actually, but the concept of Jordan Peterson's sin of missing the mark. You know when you're missing the mark. You know that when you're not in alignment, and you see how quickly the devil finds you. The snakes come out of the grass. And so if that is true, which it is, anyone here can go and down a bottle of whiskey every day for a week and see what their life turns into. We'll then know that
it's gonna be fun at first,
but we'll then know that the polar opposite is also equally as true, right?
I think the main question that I and the viewers might have at this point is, what is then the thing that we must do? Because that's the thing, right? You said it is more complex the further you are away from a mental healthy state, but usually with mental health, even if you don't follow this process, but I realize it as well. Is that you might see the problem. Maybe you don't even see the problem. But let's say you see the problem within yourself, but you don't know what to do. What are the actions? What are the things? So can you elaborate on that?
So, of course, I mean, all credit here to Dr. Paul Conti. I'm going to try and explain what my interpretation of his ideas are as best as possible.
You are the expert at the moment.
But please, I urge all of our viewers to go and watch Andrew Huberman's original video and engage with us and ask us questions. But to answer your question, at the top of the pyramid, there's two things, and it's practicing agency and gratitude as active verbs. That is the goal. That is the pinnacle. That is what you are aiming to. So agency being the idea that I am an agent in this world. I have the power to make decisions, to influence myself and other people and objects and actions, and I can do things, I can engage, right? Mm-hmm. And then gratitude, quite self-explanatory, just being grateful, simply being grateful.
So agency, sorry, just to summarize that, so you like decisions, can you say like the power to the ability to make changes,
the ability to engage with the world. I think, to engage with many people have probably thought about the idea of, well, how free are we? Like, is our life and destiny completely controlled, or do we have control over it? And it's the idea of, well, at least to a certain extent, I am a free agent. Yes. I have agency. Like, I can go into this world and I can act in a certain way that will result in change. It will result in, that butterfly effect. What do they call it? Yeah. Where something small that I do can
ripple
impact
effect
others.
Or whatever.
Good or bad. That could be good or bad.
Both ways.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then gratitude being the
and that's being grateful for the way things are.
Yeah. So grateful, and I think a lot of people know, like, grateful for your well-being, for your life, for your family, for your friends, for your mental health, maybe your physical health. For everyone, it'll be different. But like sitting, not necessarily manifesting, but processing. Mm-hmm. Okay, what is it that I'm grateful for? And not just these two words, but practicing them as active verbs. So living them, like becoming them, like really like recognizing that I'm an agent and recognizing that I'm grateful for these things. So like doing that, being in that state is sort of is what he talks about the top of the pyramid being.
I really love that, because also what it seems to me when I first heard it, making active verbs is already a nice way of phrasing it, but like the agency and the gratitude, they seem it's almost paradoxical. It's almost like opposites, because if you're grateful, that means that you are content and happy and thankful for the way things are, and the agency part is more related to changing the way things are. Mm-hmm. But now, actually, as we spoke about it also a couple of times, I understand it better in the sense that it's not a paradox, as they are not opposites, but they are orthogonal to each other. So they sketch out the parameter space in which you can move, and that is, I think that's a very beautiful thing. I like the way
you do that, sort of like a heat map.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a balance between these two states, and they're active states, and it's not impossible to be at the extremes of both at the same time.
No. And you will find maybe actually that's where you find the most meaning, right? Where you're the most grateful, and where you are exerting the most agency at the same time.
And that's linking to Joe Dispenza's idea of lack and abundance. And the more you can do things in the state of abundance, the more grateful you are in this process of doing it. Sorry, we have some helicopters flying over.
My helicopter's here, guys. I gotta run.
Tim's G2G, BRB. And yeah, Joe Dispenza talks about the idea of abundance and lack. And I think if you're doing things out of lack, then you don't really have that much agency. Something is controlling you. It's not your own decisions, and you're not that grateful, because you're too focused on envy or any of these things. But if you're doing things out of a state of abundance, then you have the agency, you have the gratitude, and you're acting accordingly.
So I like these two concepts, but can we make it more crisp? So what does it mean? So how can I make these two things active verbs in my life?
Yes, and then we go down his pyramid. So by the way, he has a PDF that he linked in his video with Dr. Andrew Huberman, not a complicated one. So I'm essentially going in the order of his episode. So he talks about the idea of agency and gratitude, and then he talks about two concepts, which at first were very confusing to me. And only after a year of not watching it and then rewatching it has it started to make sense. But he talks about the structure and the function of self. Now, we're engineers, and so I think the way that it clicked for me was when I took it to a machine, specifically our lithography machines that we work on at SML. But if you look at a machine, you have the structure of a machine. And we can use a car as an example, right? So a machine has a physical structure, but it has that structure for a reason, because it needs to perform a function, and the function being transporting people and goods from point A to point B. There's many structures of cars, and there's many other functions. Some cars drift, some cars race, some cars are electric, some cars fly, some cars go underwater, whatever it may be. But in a broad category, you have the structure of cars, and akin to that, you also have the structure of self. If you look at yourself as a vehicle, and then you have the function of cars, but you also have the function of yourself. So the car's function might be to go long distances or to go far, and you have a specific function, obviously a lot more complex than a car. But these are the two concepts, so the structure and the function of self.
So I'm sure you're going to elaborate more on that, but the immediate questions that are raising up in my mind are, what is there one function? So what is the self, maybe, like to start with that?
So at least my interpretation of what Dr. Paul Conti explained is that the structure of self is who you are as you grow up, your environment. Like, it's the things that are built into you. So Paul Conti talks a lot about the conscious and the subconscious, and he talks about how the subconscious is the bottom of the iceberg and the conscious is the tip of the iceberg. The self is the whole iceberg, but mostly under the water, because that's the idea of an iceberg.
So it's pretty much aligned with Jungian thinking as well.
Yes. Yeah. So if we look at an example, if you are a person that grew up in a nice family, in a happy household, and you are an overall, good person, well-being person, then you can say, well, the structure of self, or the framework, the scaffolding that makes you up, is reasonably complete. In a mentally healthy person, you obviously find things. Everyone has things, but there won't necessarily be huge gaping holes, right? If you have a person who grew up, let's say, in an extremely abusive environment, mentally, verbally, physically, then there may be some issues in that framework, or that function. In the structure of self. So in the scaffolding or the framework of the self, there may be some gaps, some holes. There might be an issue with the structure of self. And an example would be someone who doesn't feel particularly loved or worthy of love, right? I think that's actually maybe a more common one than many of us think. But that could be when someone was growing up or being brought up, they had something happen to them that affected their self-belief, the structure of self. So it's the way that they learned to essentially believe who they are. Right?
So the structure of self is then, as I understand it here, maybe more in the Freudian sense, something that is built up from the moment a child is born to like where they are at the moment.
And I don't think Paul Conti goes into too much detail of necessarily how the structure of self is formed, but he definitely explains that it is a thing. It's a real thing. So like we don't need to know how the car was made to know that the car exists.
Yes.
And
yes.
if there was a wheel missing, it doesn't matter how the wheel was missing.
Okay.
There's a missing wheel. Like the structure of the car is different.
Okay. But like it's not necessarily the case that he says that the structure of self is built entirely by traumas and experience in this life. It can also be like passed down or inherited. Whatever.
To be honest, I can't remember all the details, but for me personally, I think we kind of resonate on this, that there's many different things that can lead to the structure of self, and it could be a childhood trauma or just trauma in general, but it could be generational trauma.
Yeah,
exactly. It could be a physical, like if someone gets hit really hard on the head when they're young, it could be some sort of brain damage.
Real trauma.
Real trauma, right?
Yeah.
And so there's many different ways. But the reason why the structure of self is important in Paul Conti's viewpoints is because of the idea of the function of self, right? Because the function of self is what the agency part of the agency and gratitude as active verbs is. So you have a car to serve a specific function.
Yes.
But we all know one day you're driving a car, something's going to happen, right? You're going to get a flat tire. A stone is going to chip the windshield, whatever it may be. So you can see that as yourself living your life. So you have a structure of self and you interact with the world through that structure of self. So you serve, the function of self is drawn out from the structure of self. It's an abstracted.
Okay, so that's good that you clarify that, because maybe I'm seeing it wrong. But what I was thinking, maybe this is completely off, but that as you grow up, because you're mentioning like the foundational framework of a house, kind of, right? Mm-hmm. And that there were certain holes if it was broken, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But what I was thinking is that somehow, and perhaps let's take, I don't know if it's true, but let's say the function of self is survival or something, which means that as you grow up, maybe in certain situations you had to do, or your structure of self had to change in order for you to survive, to fill the function at that time. Therefore it grew in a certain way, more like a tree. And then at a later point, it's not that something is missing, but it grew in a way that served at that time to the function of self, but maybe doesn't anymore, which is why it might look different. So is it more like the function of self is a response to the environment, or is it that, like you said like
there's a relation? So I think we're going maybe a little bit into the details here, and we can, and it'll maybe make more sense if we start with a more simple example.
Sorry.
But yes, it's no problem. But yes, the structure and function of self are definitely interlinked. I think generally there's an abstraction from the structure of self towards the function of self. But if we use a simple example of a car that's missing a wheel, there's something broken in the structure of self. If you can drive it, if you try and drive it, you're going to damage the structure of the car even more by trying to get it to perform its function, right?
Yes.
So yes, the function of self in that sense is having a feedback loop and going and harming the structure of self. But we're getting a little bit, I think, lost in the details for now.
Sorry, I was just trying to, like, if we have a car, let's say, if the car doesn't have wheels but it has propellers, it might have been because in the past the car was actually in a boat.
Yes, right. Yes, you're very right, and that's if you take someone out from a concentration camp out into a very lush environment, then there's a huge contrast. And the structure of self,
it has the propeller still on, but it needs wheels.
Exactly.
I'm with you then.
So more common and let's say simple examples of the structure of self manifesting into the function of self is defense mechanisms. It's a nice, easy example. And it also allows us to talk again about the iceberg. So we said that 90% of the consciousness lies beneath the surface, like in an iceberg, which is the subconscious. Subconscious also contains most of our ideas and beliefs, so the structure of self. And if you have, we all have defense mechanisms, but if you have, let's say, a gaping hole in the structure of self, or something that's maybe a bit more extreme than usual, so if someone was abused or went through some sort of trauma, has some severe belief that they're not worthy of love or they're not good enough, then you will often see that manifest in the function of self through defense mechanisms. So you're in a normal conversation and someone makes a joke and be like, aha, you don't deserve that gold star that you got, you're at school or whatever. And you see someone switch. You see that defense mechanism rise up out of the subconscious. And that's because there's something in the structure of self that isn't complete or misaligned or whatever it may be. And because of that, it manifested into behavior through the function of self. So that behavior might be aggression, it might be avoidance, it might be an extreme emotional response. It can manifest in so many different ways. But we all have, and we spoke about it when we talked about the shadow work and like dancing with the shadows in conversations. And that's essentially what we do as people. They're in a far more nuanced and smaller form.
Yeah.
But here we're talking less about mental health in general. And so if someone has a very unhealthy reaction to whatever it may be, then often you will be able to see that there's something missing in the structure of self that allows that behavior to manifest through the function of self.
Yeah.
And here I'm talking about the bottom up, but the real power lies when you flip it around. Because then we asked ourselves in the beginning of this episode, if someone has an idea of their mental health, how does one get better? Well, firstly, how do you get an idea of your mental health? Well, you become aware. So in your day-to-day, you start looking at your own defense mechanisms. I'll give an example for myself. I had a team lead when I first joined ASML. He and I had very similar characters. He had very high standards for himself and others, and he would often challenge the quality of my work. And I would have an immediate emotional response to this. Now, when I look back, I ask myself, well, why did I have such an emotional response to him challenging my work?
Yeah.
And I realized that there was part of my structure of self, there was a bit of a gap in that, let's say, self-love or feeling good enough, right?
It was a
worthy
self-defense
enough.
kind of.
So because of that, when he poked me in that hole, then my defense mechanism was to immediately challenge it. Be like, well, how can you say that the quality of our work? Let's go into all the detail, and you then engage, you react emotionally. So that would be like a common example of aggression. Extreme aggression is another very good example where you'll all know it's, especially with people that you love, because that's where we know the holes. You poke somewhere and you get a very, very instantaneous response, almost like a step response in engineering, and that can manifest as aggression, and that's something that's rising up out of the subconscious as a defense mechanism. So what we can do is to start assessing our mental health. We watch ourselves, we watch our behaviors, we watch our interactions with others, and we look at unhealthy behaviors, or not even unhealthy, but behaviors that we don't really like about ourselves, and defense mechanisms that are interesting. They don't even have to be wrong, right? It could be a healthy defense mechanism, but something that you maybe didn't notice before. Maybe you love too much in some, whatever it may be, right? From there, you can start unpacking backwards, and you can say, I caught myself getting very aggressive in this particular interaction. Why? What is it in my structure of self? So what patterns you can, and the physical way to do it is through patterns, because we have pattern recognition systems. But what patterns can I recognize that gives me clues as to what's going on in the structure of self?
So patterns in your own behaviors, what you're referring
Behaviors
to,
or the defense mechanism. But behaviors. It manifests in behaviors.
So then you were not looking at patterns that triggered you as well, or is it just patterns of behavior? Both.
Yeah, because a trigger means that you have some response.
Yeah.
And that response is a behavior.
Yeah.
So another common example would be if someone is, he uses as a very good example, if someone is very successful in all areas of their life, besides from relationships. So they're good at work, they're physically healthy, they've got many friends, but they very much struggle in relationships. Well, then that's a point of interest, right? So then you can ask yourself, well, when I have behaviors, when I act in the world, 9 times out of 10, I act in the right way, and it's in the line. But in this one area, I lack. Why is it? What patterns are interesting here that can allow me to understand more about this and essentially unpack it, right? And so you can go into the structure of self and you can ask yourself questions, right? What in the times that I have been in relationships, what have I done or what have I not done? Or, you can start asking yourself questions to understand the behaviors that manifest around that, and essentially what's going on in the structure of self there.
So I think, this is a very nice view into how that frameworks of Paul Conti actually works. So thank you for sharing that. I'm just questioning at this moment. So far, I understand everything, but what are then the questions that you... So if I had a problem, let's say, or... Well, maybe I'm just assessing if I have a problem at all. So I'm looking at my unwanted or unconscious responses to potential triggers. Like you said, can be healthy, can be unhealthy, who knows. I'm making a list of defense mechanisms. But then how do I go from there? So if I want to ask myself the right questions about those defense mechanisms, where do I start? What are the questions to ask?
That's a brilliant question. And if I was a registered psychologist, I would be able to give you a proper answer. Okay. What I'm going to say is that...
I'm trying to get as much value for free here. Okay,
what I will say is that's episode 2 and 3 of the breakdown. And maybe in a future episode, before then, I'll rewatch them and I'll be able to give more information.
We should get some commission from Huberman. Also for
maybe. But we will try and sell some electrolytes and cooling beds. And what do they sell? AG1. Use our discount code.
We should do that.
We should.
Good idea.
But I'm not going to pretend that I know the answer. I'm still on my own journey, and I'm going through it, and I'm using.
What did you do yourself?
So I use ChatGPT, right?
Okay.
So what I did, I'll be dead honest, because of the podcast, I downloaded the full audio of that podcast. I did the transcription because I've got the software on my phone. I uploaded it to Google NotebookLM. In fact, all 4 of them and I can share the notebook with you. I can share it with all of them. So you have then the 4 texts, so as references, and then it's an AI, and you can ask questions. So I asked the question, how can I start unpacking these things? And it gave me step by step journal prompts, things that I can think about, patterns, and then So I journaled about it, I thought about it, and I took my answers and I gave it back to the AI, and I said, well, what's interesting about this? How can I think? And it said, these patterns look like they're linked. Is there something there? If so, and it really broke it down. And I found that fascinating.
Michael, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Legit.
Let me see if I can actually open it right.
We have we're at 42 minutes, everything's all.
Okay.
Let's just see if we cut this conversation out, but I think we should actually maybe make that one of the main... Yeah, make it available. So hey, we are going to give you a free link to the LLM that you can use to do the shit.
Or even just the text files of the transcripts, and then just a quick guide on how to... It's so easy to drag and drop.
Yeah, you can use that shit tonight, basically. You can discover yourself. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I will use it as well. I think that's a really nice... that's a really nice way of merging AI with... the knowledge that we already have,
especially because AI is a master at pattern recognition.
Yes,
and our brains are pattern recognition systems.
Yeah.
And so, can recognize what's it? Real recognize real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but really, I think it's a very smart way of integrating the two. And okay, so that is probably the easiest and fastest way forward.
It's a way.
Yeah.
I think probably the best is to actually go to a proper psychologist, right? And work with them for over time and all these things. But that is one of the ways that at least I started doing it.
And can you maybe also elaborate a little bit if you'd like to share on some success stories from yourself then? Because you've undergone quite a transformation in the past year and a half, 2 years, right?
Yeah.
What did you experience, and how fast did you feel like you experienced results, or it did click for you? How was your journey in that sense?
So for me, I'm still definitely very much on my journey. I would say, once again, it's an exponential curve. What I will say is that it's nothing great grows in the comfort zone. So it's an uncomfortable process, especially if you really want to get real with it and you get real with yourself. I recognized how much... I recognized how powerful the human mind and consciousness is when you give it a goal to work towards. And so many things that one would realize about oneself become apparent when you sit down for 10, 20, 30 minutes a day and you start trying to answer these questions. At first you draw a blank. I drew a blank. What are the common patterns in it? I don't know. And then you think of something and then you're like, oh shit, like that's deep. There's something there. I don't know what it is, but so you write it down, right? And the act of writing it down, it goes into your brain, whatever. And then the next day, you realize something more. Maybe it's not a comfortable thing that you realize, and like sometimes you maybe want to take a break or whatever it may be. But for me, I mean, the first thing that I realized, and this was way back, was this idea of feeling like I'm enough. And I think a lot of people, at least in our environments that work at ASML, that come from third world countries, very competitive countries, we spoke about this a bit in the Ika episode, have a tendency to maybe feel like they're not enough because of the competitive nature of where they've come from, and use that as a way to drive you. So that's definitely the first big hurdle that I had to overcome, was this extrinsic versus intrinsic, not motivation, but validation, right? So that was the first thing that I realized, and that I didn't realize through journaling. That I realized just through thinking and through watching it. And then, more recently.
But then you realize you have that, right? So you realize, okay, I have this belief about myself that I might not be enough, or whatever it might be for you.
And then you look at how it manifests in behaviors.
Yeah.
So overworking oneself, or being overinvested, so caring too much about the project that I'm working on, or whatever it may be. So I recognized the behaviors, and then started asking myself the question, well, why is it that I care so much, like too much about this? Because there's a healthy balance with like caring, especially with like work. You want to care enough so that you do well, but if something just naturally goes wrong or whatever, you don't go home and slit your wrists, right? Like whatever, it is what it is. And so I recognized it was interesting for me that the balance seemed off for me.
But does then the change come simply through the realization and like realizing, okay, I have this belief about myself, and then identifying the patterns and the moments where it goes wrong? Is that the way?
Well, what happened for me was I recognized it. Once I recognized it, you'll be surprised at how often you recognize it thereafter. So you become a master at recognizing it. Then what I did was I started asking myself questions. And the first question that you ask, why? Why do I feel like I'm not enough? Okay, I came from a competitive environment. And you think, okay, do I need to feel like I'm not enough? Okay, so it's a defense mechanism. It's a behavior pattern that my body has, my mind and my consciousness and my body has created to keep me safe. Very true if I lived in South Africa. Do I still need that? Is that still useful now? And essentially through some really deep thought, I realized, no, it's not, because I have a permanent contract at one of the best companies in Europe. I'm doing well at my career. I get along with all my colleagues. I have friends. I've met you through the talent program. It was around the same sort of time that this was all happening. And I realized,
successful podcast.
But I also then realized that the purpose of the defense mechanism was outdated. The propellers on the car could actually be changed for wheels.
Yeah, we're not in the water anymore.
And once you realize that, you're like, oh, well, fuck, it's so much better driving on wheels than propellers. Like, it then makes sense. And the relief that I felt from that, like the peace that I found from that was incredible, right? And then like life becomes more enjoyable. I don't become so emotional in discussions with managers and with other people or whatever it may be, right?
And how long did this process take you? Let's say for this specific example, was that something like
a year and a half? Yeah.
That time, and all that time, I mean, off and on, I guess you were journaling and reflecting about it. Was there one single moment where you felt like now it clicked?
I explained that in, I think it was episode 3, where we were talking about the shadow, and I talked about when I was having a conversation with someone, so it was the same team lead of mine, and I spoke about how I saw that dragon or that shadow come up over him, and I had that moment where I could have said to him, "Are you sure?" Or I get that, so you have the power, right? So in other words, the defense mechanism of him was, at least I think, that he didn't feel like he was enough. And I recognized it in the other person.
Yeah.
And I was in that process of recognizing within myself. but I'd become good at recognizing it, and I'd become good at seeing how it didn't serve me. And I noticed in that interaction, he didn't want to be acting and talking about what he was talking about, because we knew each other. He wanted to be relaxed and chilled and talking about his cycling because he loved it. But this had taken over him, and I recognized that, and I recognized that it happened to me. And then I realized I could free myself from it.
Right, that's when you saw it. What did you do in that situation?
I said to him, I didn't use it for the worst. I didn't say to him, "Oh, are you sure?" I just said, well, that's interesting. And I listened to him. Like I cared. I offered a caring. It was a while ago, so I can't remember the exact details. But I didn't take advantage of it, and I could have, because he was my teammate. I could have messed with him, right? So I could have said,
you had the power, and
I could have been like, "You sure?" And like that's the worst that someone could have done to me, because I knew where my weak points were. His one was immediately apparent, and it was like poking with like a fire needle right in there.
There is a very beautiful quote from Alan Watt. I don't know if it's Alan Watts. I don't know if it's from him or if he's quoting someone else. But it's basically like, you have exactly the power that you can be trusted with. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what happened, man. Like the moment that it clicked, you got the power to use it, but you also understood how it worked, so you wouldn't use it against.
There are bad actors in this world, and there are people who manipulate. I'm thinking in my mind the 48 laws of power, but there are people who manipulate other people for impure reasons. So people who become very aware and conscious of these things, but then can use it against other people. And that's also why I think it's important that we, just like we become physically healthy, so that we are able to protect ourselves against physical disturbances. Like if someone randomly punches you, like you're not going to just fall over. Yeah. You develop some sort of resilience physically. I think part of one's mental health is also developing resilience in a cognitive way, mentally, and also being able to have the skills. You don't need to be the grandmaster, but have the skills of recognizing when someone is taking advantage of you, manipulating 100%. You. What's this new term on the internet? Gaslighting you, or whatever it may be. And before this podcast, we were talking about how I was in a discussion this afternoon with someone who set traps for me, and I went down the traps. I recognize it, even though I've done all this work, and we're all human, right? We get into the heat of the it's a journey, and I recognize it. And I stepped in some traps that someone laid for me, and afterwards I knew it's so clear to me that they were there, and I know that I should have just risen above it. But I'm someone who's passionate, and I'm engaged in the world, and that's one of the consequences of that. So it's this constant balance of having the awareness, and then also utilizing it in the active verb. It's that agency, right? Agency as an active verb. So it's recognizing in those heated conversations, I'm an agent. I can pause for a second. I can take a step back. I have control here. I don't need to let my defense mechanisms take the front and center stage. They will always advise me, but I really am in control.
So maybe just bring it back. But thank you again, like for the personal experiences as well. I think it inspires people to go on this journey and to do what you did. So a bit of a recap: we have the structure of self, the function of self, and preferably we should be thankful and exert agency. Are these like these are very interesting and good concepts to think about it, but are they also connected? I also know, because I listen to the podcast, there is like Paul Conti talks about these different kind of drives. Is there something that connects it all, or can you?
Later on in the episode, it talks about the reason why you want a healthy structure of self that manifests into a healthy function of self and allows you to practice agency and gratitude as active verbs, and that is to essentially serve the generative drive, so that the positive drive to contribute to the world, to add value, something that we've spoken about before in this podcast. We also talked a bit about money or whatever it may be, but
adding value, perhaps,
but for everyone it looks different, but it's a generative drive. It could be through a creative process or analytical process, but engage in humans are intellectual beings, so engage in the intellectual side of life. And he essentially talks about two primary drives or main categories of drives which lie under the generative drive. That is the pleasure drive and what he calls the aggressive drive. But the aggressive drive, for you and me, I think it makes sense, especially like maybe men. The term aggressive drive makes sense, but maybe not for others. And then he says, well, the aggressive drive can be seen sort of as the drive which is forward leaning into the world, engaging into the world. We were talking a bit about the structure of self earlier, and I think another very common way that we can link and explain the generative drive, pleasure drive, and aggression drive is if something goes wrong. So in the ultimate state, the pleasure and aggression drive serve the generative drive, just like the structure and function of self allows one to practice acts of gratitude and agency. But if something goes wrong in the structure of self, if there's some severe trauma or abuse, then people can self-soothe through substances, as an example, alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be. That's the pleasure drive. So then one develops an overactive pleasure drive, which no longer serves the generative drive.
Right.
And you have this imbalance.
It's taking over. You're hijacked, basically.
Yes. And the same can happen with the aggressive drive. And I mean, I think a common example with the aggressive drive is maybe the idea of stress, right? So people over-engage in the world to activate cortisol, to activate the stress response because it feels familiar or for whatever reason it may be. And then once again, you over-engaged in the world, or you overwork yourself, and you're not serving the generative drive. Although you, at the time, you may think you are, in the big picture, you're really not.
And then the aggressive drive, I don't know if I understand it correctly, but the way that I, again, see it from a maybe more biological, Jungian kind of perspective, the aggressive drive is there to protect your boundaries, like and maybe move forward into the world as well. What would be the purpose of the pleasure drive in that sense? Is there can you make an analogy there, or
that's a good question? I don't know the exact purpose of it.
And would you say that if they both serve the generative drive, does not necessarily mean that aggressive and pleasure coincide? It means that they serve it, basically.
They do, and I'm sure there will be some relationship between them.
Yeah.
And to just answer your question, just thinking now, and I don't know if this is something that Paul Conti mentions, and he would answer these questions obviously in his podcast. But I think the pleasure drive is very much linked to motivation, because we spoke about dopamine previously on this podcast. So I think that when you have a healthy pleasure drive which serves a generative drive, that is essentially the dopaminergic and serotonin and oxytocin feedback loops within our brain, and
it's giving you reward for progress.
Yes,
right.
And so when you're moving in the right direction, it gives you more reward, and so you have this healthy feedback loop. Yes. But if you spike it for whatever reason, or you self-soothe, whatever, then you throw it off track, and then you feel lethargic, you don't feel motivated, you don't want to engage in the world, you don't feel like you have agency, and you're not actively practicing gratitude. And so all these concepts are then interlinked.
Okay, that sounds really, really good. So that means that now we have found the means to look at ourselves by looking at, let's say, unwanted or unconscious responses to potential triggers, asking ourselves questions. Where does it come from? What is the underlying pattern? Trying to realize that, reflect on it, maybe through journaling. Trying to keep in mind the gratitude and the agency. And then we have these other three concepts of generative drive, aggressive drive, and pleasure drive. That pleasure drive and aggressive drive should be in service of the generative drive. Is there anything else that Paul Conti mentions there? I mean, this is a pretty...
it's a pretty complete...
It's pretty complete,
yeah.
I think.
And, he goes into more details in other episodes, but he also tries to keep the framework as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that those are the main concepts. And at least within my understanding and perception, that skeleton, that structure, answers enough of my questions. I'm able to figure out... I have the tools to figure out as much as I need to, at least at this stage, with those things. So I can ask myself, if I'm serving my pleasure drive, my aggressive drive, is there something that's coming out of me that I don't like, or just find interesting and want to learn more about? Is there a pattern that I'm practicing, and these sorts of things? So that's what I believe is on the PDF. And then obviously we also spoke about the idea of the conscious and the subconscious.
Yeah.
That's also very important in all of this, because when you're doing this work and you're understanding, you're looking from the behaviors and the surface level triggers and defense mechanisms into the subconscious. So you're a observer.
Yeah.
Really, like, you're guessing, you're playing a game, you're playing Minecraft essentially with your brain and with your subconscious. You're saying, well, I noticed some things. What's there? Is there something? That you're constantly just trying to decipher what's in that subconscious.
Right. I think this is really insightful, and I see also a lot of parallels again, like I mentioned, to Jungian thinking. Maybe I can lay that out in a different episode as well.
I'd love that.
Like the reverse. But yeah, man, it's nice to think about it, and I'm also trying to understand now, like, how if we have. If someone is really more mentally unhealthy, how this becomes more complex. As you have multiple patterns, you might, not directly know which pattern now actually caused what kind of response.
Yeah.
So that's where you get more complexity. And then as a, is there also a way in which a person who is generally mentally healthy, like you said, it should be very simple in this
they're
framework.
able to practice agency and gratitude actively.
That's the main thing.
And I think as you and I as people, we can recognize that, right?
Yeah.
You meet people who are able to practice. They're in control of themselves. They have the agency, and they're grateful for life.
Yeah.
They're not envious people. They don't have enormous egos. They're not trying to serve some aggressive drive or chase pleasure.
Yeah.
And sit drinking at a bar all night alone, or whatever, whatever it may be. We recognize this in people. At least I've met people where I recognize this, and that's the pinnacle. That's the goal.
And I can recognize it in you, Michael, as well. I know that you're practicing it. I've seen you undergo like the change of the last few years. I've been privileged to see that. And I can say, like, it's been amazing. Like, you've gone through a lot. So it's quite inspiring, I can say. And I can recommend it to anyone watching this that, just try it out.
Yeah.
Even just trying to do the simple thing, which is practicing agency and gratitude.
Indeed.
Daily.
Indeed. And as we said, we'll make the notebook available. The Google LM notebook, make it available.
Sorry, I
This
got
little
Zoom
it's
for
all right.
some reason.
You're just too big. You were flexing, bro. You were flexing, and your phone was like, "Why are there 3 heads all of a sudden?" So we make the Google LM notebook accessible to people, at least the text files, and I can show people how to upload it and ask some questions. And yeah, like, investigate it. It's one train of thought. It's a psychologist. He's clearly good at what he does because of his position in Harvard. And yeah, it's something that I found super interesting, and I just really wanted to talk about again, because I know we had spoken about it a bit.
Thank you for sharing, Michael. I think it's been an amazing trip. I learned a lot. Actually, a lot of things cleared up for me, and I will be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm eager to hear more about the Jungian thinking, because it's not something that I'm very familiar with. So I think in another episode we unpack that, and then we can also do comparisons. And
let's do it, because I think, like, in the basis there's a lot of overlap. I think Jungian thinking is just maybe a little bit more focusing or drawing from symbolism and like fairy tales and older stories, how to understand basically what people in the past already distilled in kind of existing patterns that you can use right now as well to help you, kind of like. But I do understand that might be an extra level of complexity that might not always be necessary and can be confusing for people as well. Yeah. So I really, really like this way that Paul Conti laid it out, and the way that you paraphrased it in less than 4 hours. So hey, I mean, pretty
Look
good.
At that. No,
pretty
thanks.
Good.
Thanks for asking some good questions. I really enjoy thinking about these things, unpacking more, and yeah, we will continue to bring our thoughts and ideas and learnings that we discover through books or podcasts or whatever to this podcast, to our audience.
100%.
I look forward to this journey. It's already such an amazing journey.
It's always so much fun, right?
Episode 7. We're 70% of the way there to episode 10. We need to think of something special to do for episode 10. And
I think we have some good ideas.
we do. Stay tuned for that.
Stay tuned. Yeah.
Great. I think we wrap it up there.
Yep.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone.
We did that.